I've not played it yet, but I've seen so many clips of people dying in that game in ways that, from my untrained eye, just looking, from the out looking in, I don't see enjoyable, like, good game design. I just see, like, a bunch of Capcom fuck yous over and over again, and I just don't see where the fun is in that. But I haven't played it yet, so I can't, fully critique it yet. But yeah, Elden Ring, how much more time have you spent with it? How are you finding it?
I think about 30 hours in. And like the setup of the game is that I think there's you have the Elden Ring, which has been split into 6 parts, which I think is the only thing George R.R. Martin did in this game. It's like, I'm going to write a very brief plot synopsis. You do the rest from software. So you have the Elden Ring 6 parts. A different king has each part. You go around killing them. That's like,
it really does feel like they just slapped his name on like the kind of front as like some branding, and that was kind of about as much as we got out of it.
I can't remember the podcast I was listening to, but somebody described it as like fantasy Mad Libs. It's like you have the ring, and then George R.R. Martin just wrote Elden. Like, I think that is the extent of George R.R. Martin's contributions to this game. Because everyone that asks the question is like, oh, so how George R.R. Martin does it feel? It's like, not at all. This is thoroughly From Software in every way. If you played Dark Souls, it's the same thing, like conceptually. It's the From Software thing. It's just like, change the word hollowed to tarnished. It's the same thing, but we've changed the word. You don't use Estus flasks, you use blood vials. You don't use blood vials, you use whatever they're called in Elden Ring. I don't remember. It's just like using the same mechanics, the same ideas with different words. I think it's a really good game. Like, to play Breath of the Wild and play Elden Ring back to back, they're not the same game. Like, Breath of the Wild does offer the player much more freedom in terms of how they approach challenges, and obviously you can climb anything in Breath of the Wild, so you can literally go anywhere, but you can't do in Elden Ring, even though you can technically go anywhere. But it still has that same like sense of unguided like freedom, unguided exploration, where they're not like go here, go here, go here. It's just like, here's your map, go explore it. And you do explore it, and everywhere you go, you find things, and that's really cool. Like, even in an area at the start of the game, if you joke, at one stage I was like, I don't think I've gotten in that direction. And in that direction was one of the mini dungeons. You go into a cliff for, and then you fight a boss and you get an item. Though, I will say, getting the items in this game might be one of my bigger pet peeves with it, because the whole idea is it's this big open world experience where you can go anywhere and do anything, and that's really cool. So if you go somewhere you're not supposed to and do a thing you're not supposed to, you usually get an item that you can't use, which I think is pretty lame. So like, you will get this really cool sword for beating this boss you shouldn't have been able to beat this early, but you can't use that sword until you have like 40 strength, and that's,
that's a bit shit.
That's like 60 hours further into the game. That's 40 more level ups into your strength stat. And that's pretty lame. And I understand why they do that, because the game would kind of break if you could go to the end of the game, grab the cool sword, go to the start of the game. It's the same reason Breath of the Wild has breakable weapons, so that if you go to, but at least in Breath of the Wild, you get to use the sword a little while. If you go to the end of the game, get the cool sword, you can beat the start of the game boss with the cool sword, even if it'll break like 7 hits later. So I think there is a middle ground there, but that they allow you to use the rewards of doing those challenges or kind of breaking the game design a little. But it's a really cool game that allows you to explore everywhere. I will say, I think it's the game with the best horse combat I've ever seen. And I don't see a ton of people talking about the horse combat. I think it's because the horse combat is actually technically a little easier, because your horse is just much faster than everything, and you can just swing off your horse, and it's really cool. But I found the horse segments of this game and the horse boss battle is much more interesting and much more fun, as opposed to... I kind of don't like the old school Dark Souls dungeons that they put in this game, because the way this game works is there's this open world, and then they just slapped a traditional From Software dungeon in like 6 different locations. And every time I get to like the traditional dungeon, I don't really like it for 2 reasons. It's much more constraining because you're obviously in the kind of the old school Dark Souls narrow hallways, but also they change some of the mechanics. One of the coolest things in this game, one of the things I really like, is you have a certain number of heals, and if you clear out like a group of enemies, you gain some of your heals back. So if you start with 4 or 5, I think, and if you use them and then clear out a group of enemies, they might give you 1 or 2 back, so you can keep on exploring. And that's a cool mechanic. But when you go into one of the dungeons, they just remove that. They take that idea out, where it's like, if you clear out the entire group of enemies in the entire dungeon, you get nothing back unless you go to one of the save points where you refresh your heals. And I think that's kind of lame. It's like, put the system in the game, or don't put the system of the game. Don't put it in the game and take it away from me.
Do you think that they're trying to, like, this area you're going to be in is like a trial that you have to, like, undertake? You know, is the pacing that they're trying to do something different with it, which is why they're taking it away? Like, can you see where they may have decided to make that decision to do that?
I think it's just to make the thing harder.
Right. Cool.
Like that's what it comes down to. I think they said if we gave them the system where they still get their heals back if they clear out 3 or 4 enemies, this dungeon will be a lot easier. So we're just going to not let them do it anymore. And like another system in the game is you can summon like enemies and stuff to help you. So you can summon a pack of wolves to operate on your behalf. And there's just areas of the game where you can't. And again, it's either a mechanic in the game or it's not. And I think it's really lame that it's like, you can use this mechanic out in the open world, you can use it to fight enemies, but then get into certain rooms, certain areas, occasionally certain bosses, and you just can't. We're just not going to let you use it.
It is one of those things where, like, sometimes game logic and real world logic clash, and you know, like, sometimes a game will use real world logic, but then it will throw in something like that just because, hey, it's a game. Like, you know, like the game I've been playing, Infernax, that I'll talk about in a bit. It gives you can you pick up an item that allows you to instant teleport to anywhere in the world, and its icon is like wings. So, you know, the idea is that, you know, you kind of get picked up and flown to wherever it is, but it doesn't work inside like buildings and stuff. And there is kind of a real world logic to it that, like, hey, if I got picked up and flown about, I'm just going to fly straight into the side of the building that I'm in. So I can kind of accept that I need to be in an outside environment. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's like if you have a pack of wolves, they're going to act like a pack of wolves regardless of whether you're inside or not.
Let me summon my wolves. I like the wolves because they're very useful, because they don't do much damage, but they do distract enemies and let me just like wail on them because they get distracted attacking the wolves and they last a while. So the wolves are my go-to because they're literally cannon fodder for me to take out any boss or enemy. So I do have some like small issues with it, but I think exploring the open world is really cool. Like there was one night where I'm just like, I'm going to jump on my horse and I'm going to just keep on walking until the game doesn't let me walk anymore. And I did that for about 3 hours, where I just kept on going and kept on going and kept on going and finding the save points which operate as your fast travel. So just pushing the map out and pushing the map out and discovering new areas. Even if how many
times did you die on that journey?
You see, not that many, because on the horse you're way faster than any enemy. It's the typical Dark Souls thing where you can just run past everything if you really want to. And if you jump on your horse and you just keep on moving, odds are you probably won't die that often unless you get caught and blindsided by something. If you stopped and fought things in that area, you'd die a lot. But you can just run past everything and you can keep on running, you can fill out the map. And I was just like, how far am I going to go? I'm just going to keep on going and filling out every area of the map that I can at the moment. And another really cool thing is, like, the first boss in the game I found like really hard. I think, well, technically it's the second boss, I think. The second like scripted story boss. It's the first one where you get a great rune, a part of the Elden Ring. So I found that really hard. I found it much tougher than a lot of the open world bosses, because like the difficulty in this game has varied wildly for me. I'll either one shot something, or I'll first time kill it. Kill it without dying. Not hit to kill it in one hit, but I'll either kill it without dying, or it'll be the brick wall. I'll just be running up against it 15 times until I finally take it down, mostly through a stroke of luck as opposed to skill. And I found a lot of the open world bosses quite easy, but the actual story boss quite hard. But then there's a path behind the area where you find that boss, where you can just walk to the next area. You can just walk around the dungeon to the area behind the dungeon where they'll spit you out if you go through the dungeon, and you can just keep exploring. So the game, again, it's really cool that the game doesn't have those walls. It's not like you can't get to this area until you beat this boss. It's like, actually, if you look around often enough, you'll actually find a route around that, and you can go keep exploring and keep leveling up so that you can come back and fight the boss later. And that's really cool, and that's the coolest thing about the game, that you can just keep on going, keep on exploring, keep on finding new things.
I guess I'm gonna have to play this fucking thing at some point.
It's too critically acclaimed not to.
I know.
Is it the best game of all time? I think I have too many like big enough issues with it to say it's the best game of all time. I would say of the FromSoftware games, I still much prefer Bloodborne. I think Bloodborne's a much better game, but there is a lot about this game that you do have to experience, and I think it's really cool to experience. And again, it's that thing of like a game that has been reviewed as well as this, you just can't avoid, can you?
Yeah, would it just be easier if I just quit the podcast? You know,
Just escape the discourse.
oh my god. Yeah, I'll probably play it at some point. I was surprised that it's not a full price game as well. That I was shocked by.
Is it not?
I don't believe so. Like part of the issue is that there's price differentiation between the euros and the pound. But like as far as I'm aware, this was like a 40 quid game, or I'd heard or seen people saying that they paid 40 quid for it.
Well, it's on last gen as well, so the last gen versions would be around that price, wouldn't they?
Ah, maybe that's what it is then.
Because it's on PS4 and Xbox.
Yes.
Uh,
How like I read a lot that like performance wise, this game is a bit ropey in places. How's that been for you?
It's rickety. It really is.
Right, okay.
It's a rickety game where it like routinely, like very often, there'll be just whole textures that don't load for a little bit. The just grass won't appear, and you'll look at it and you'll think, oh, that looks weird. It's like, and then the grass will pop and it's like, all right, that makes more sense. And that happens quite often. In terms of like how much does it affect the gameplay, it's not none, because there is like frame drops and dropped inputs, and there's times where you'll be like, listen, I dodged and this game bullshitted me. There will be some occasional times like that, but it's not like totally game breaking, but it is a little disappointing.
I mean, I'm probably not going to play the game for a little while anyway. So, like, I know that I don't know if they already had a patch that came out to fix some stuff, but I imagine over the next couple of months they'll work on some of the stuff performance-wise. So, by the time I get to it, they'll have hopefully smoothed some of that out.
Yeah, and I appreciate that a lot of these games were made in a work-from-home environment. Like,
they
were all gotten over the line like that. But it is a little weird to like play Horizon, and play Pokemon. I expect it most out of Pokemon because it's an open world game. Well, not an open world quite, but a large sandbox game running on Switch. So like I understand why the Pokemon game is a little visually inconsistent. But like the big PS5 games, it's still disappointing to me to be like, this is the new cool piece of hardware, and even Horizon and Elden Ring have some like just weird visual hiccups that you're like, well, it just doesn't feel next gen,
I mean, I don't want to sit here and proclaim to like know what the fuck I'm talking about, because I've done a 12-week course on 3D environmental design.
You put the alarms in the stealth level, you know everything.
Obviously, yeah. But this shit ain't easy, and certainly when you have like a world as big as, I don't know how big these worlds are, but I presume that like the Horizon world is massive. The Elden Ring world, I mean, if you're running for 3 hours on a horse and still haven't seen everything, that's massive. There's just no way in hell that you can QA test and be just absolutely 100% that everything in this world is working the way that it's intended. It's gonna happen. Like, when you've got a 2D side-scrolling game that has 8 levels that you can play in about 2 hours, it's pretty easy to see if there's anything that pops up that's like, oh, that wasn't meant to be there.
Yeah, and even if you just go to the older FromSoftware games, which are contained spaces that have like a certain number of ways you can go and a certain number of things you can see at any given time, and imagine those are equally easier to QA test.
Exactly, and you're gonna have to have parts of these worlds as well where things are rendered at 2K or maybe even 1K, because you just you can't have everything as a fucking 4K or an 8K asset. Technically, even for the PS5, you cannot do that in a world as massive as Elden Ring. So you have to like know which battles to pick and choose. So I think like the bigger thing is just like does the game consistently run at 60 FPS? That's always like that's the first thing, and then everything underneath that. Like texture pop-ins, hey, whatever, like it'll happen.
Yeah, who cares at the end of the day? Yeah,
exactly. But yeah, I'm glad that you're enjoying it. I don't know if Jack has purchased it yet. I know Dave has it. I will probably get to it at some point, but
I'm a little surprised you're not a From guy.
So here's the thing, right? I've played a little bit of Dark Souls, and I am the kind of person that enjoys a game where I die a lot and I learn through repetition, but I enjoy that more in like a platforming sense. Because partly I find the controls, I feel much more in control of what's happening. Like, if I careen off the side of a platform in Super Meat Boy, like, that is purely on me, that I didn't put my inputs in correctly. But I found any time that I've played a Dark Souls game, I've just always found that the combat is just too sluggish for me. And it's, I wouldn't say it's a hack and slash type of game, but it's more in that vein in my mindset at least. And then when I play some of it, I'm like, well, I'd rather just go play a hack and slash game that I do enjoy, like a Devil May Cry or a Bayonetta or whatever. So I've just never sat down and enjoyed them, even though a lot of the mechanics fit into the style of game that I would enjoy. And it's why I'm really looking forward to Sifu, because I feel like that is the kind of game that is in my flow of what I enjoy, in that learn through repetition and die 100 times, but when you nail it, it's really super satisfying. And I'm sure if I broke through whatever hurdles that I have with whether it's Bloodborne or with Elden Ring, maybe I'll find something in there for me, but it hasn't happened to this point. And also, like, that whole kind of fantasy world setting, I don't give a shit about. I don't care for Game of Thrones, I don't care for Lord of the Rings. So, Elden Ring has 2 massive hurdles I have to overcome, and I'm not entirely convinced that will happen, but I will give it a go. I will give an earnest try at some point. So
yeah, I do get it, because like every game has its own like just gameplay language that you have to learn and understand. Like even Zelda games, like if you play Ocarina of Time as your first Zelda game, you'll have like trouble with the way they design puzzles and the way they set up like dungeons, as opposed to if it's like your 4th Zelda game and you've played Wind Waker and Skyward Sword. You understand how Zelda designs the dungeons at that stage. You understand what the bottom of a wall looks like. You understand where you move the block. And the From games have a very similar thing where their combat is very deliberate. It's everything you do, you have to time well, or you will die. That is the simple reality of all of the FromSoftware games. You can kind of wing it, but if you do wing it, you are at risk of dying at any given moment. Like if you go search through my Twitter and find the clip of me beating that first boss, you will see, by all rights, I probably should have died. Like, I just randomly dodged a few attacks and got those last couple hits in, because I did the classic FromSoftware thing where he had a sliver of health and I panicked and I went in to try and kill it, and then it nearly killed me instead, and I got away with it. But that's the entire game. You have to be deliberate in your movement, because it is the big swinging animation, and you will go through with that animation until you can dodge, and if you've mistimed it, you'll die. That's just the game. And I'm interested to see how many people hit that wall in this game, because it is, even though people have talked about how accessible it is, and we talked about this on last week's episode, how it's not really more accessible, it's not really easier, it's just the open world makes it easier to just go do different things if you hit a wall. But I am still interested to see the number of people who do come up against that Elden Ring combat, or that FromSoftware combat, which is slower and like more deliberate than you would expect if you've even played a Breath of the Wild, which has much quicker sword swings and much quicker dodges than FromSoftware games do. So seeing like a bunch of new players, by all accounts, this is, I think, the best selling FromSoftware game, so it's doing real well.
That will be in our news section later. Yeah, I will say this. One thing I do appreciate, and what I've read from people that I respect their work and what they've said, is like, I can appreciate this whole like, hey, you beat that boss by whatever means necessary, by hook or crook. If you find an exploit, if you find like whatever that probably wasn't intended to be in there, doesn't fucking matter. If you beat that boss, that is your victory and you've earned it. And I do appreciate that, like, there's a kind of scrappiness, I guess, to like boss fights, compared to something like in a Metroid Dread, for example, where, those boss fights are pretty much like, hey, there is just one way that you defeat this boss, and that's it. You learn the pattern, and that's it. I can at least appreciate, that there's probably this kind of scrappiness to it. But
and I was talking about my wolves. Like, there's people who be like, oh, that's not the pure way to play Elden Ring. You should beat it on one-on-one combat. It's like, no, thank you, sir. I will distract this boss with my wolves and attack it from behind. And I am perfectly okay doing this.
Garrett Kidney, pro animal rights.
Yeah, my wolves are my friends.
Until they're my ammunition or bait or whatever.
Until the other get squashed by the giant boss's freaking dragon hand that shoots fire and they're dead.